Bore da and good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's Lost Voices, Lost Lives conference. Delighted to have you all with us this morning, and delighted indeed that so many of you could make it this morning. I'll hand over to the Police and Crime Commissioner shortly, who will formally open this morning's conference. But before I do, just a few housekeeping issues, if I may, please, which will hopefully help with the smooth running of the event this morning. So I'm sure you'll appreciate, with the sheer volume of people that we are expecting this morning, it would assist if you could all ensure that you are on mute, and if you could turn your cameras off as well, please, just to ensure that, because we've got a few videos that will be played during the morning, it will just ensure that they play smoothly for us all. At the bottom of your screens, you will see a Q&A option. Please do feel free to submit your questions to the panelists through the Q&A option at the bottom of your screens, please. We do have two Q&A sessions. You will have seen, hopefully, from the agenda that's been circulated in advance. One just before the break, and then a second Q&A session before we conclude the conference this morning. So do, as I say, please feel free to submit your questions to the panelists throughout the morning. Wrth gwrs, mae 'na croeso I chi hefyd ofyn y cwestiwn trwy'r iaith Gymraeg. For those of you who are with us this morning who speak Welsh, you are very welcome indeed to submit your question through Welsh on the Q&A function as well. Where the question has been asked in Welsh, if that question is directed to the PCC will answer that question in Welsh as well. So at the bottom of your screens, you will see the interpretation option. If you were to click on that and select English, forgive me, then you will hear the translation. We have Melvin Thomas with us this morning, carrying out the interpretation facility for us. So you will have seen the agenda. We have a fantastic programme lined up for you this morning. I'm very grateful to everybody who've made their time available to join us this morning. So it's a busy schedule, some fantastic speakers, so we'll crack on. So with no further ado, if I can hand over to the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales, Mr. Arfon Jones, who will formally open this morning's conference. Diolch yn fawr pawb. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning to you all, and welcome to the Lost Voices, Lost Lives conference. I'm Arfon Jones, Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales. I wish that we were welcoming you all to North Wales this morning, but for now, an online conference will have to do. As always with technology, please be patient with us. The purposes of the Lost Voice, Lost Lives conference is to raise awareness and support for individuals who have no voice, have limited access to services, and have often experienced trauma in their lifetime. Those who are entrenched within the addiction cycle are people too. They are families, friends, and need as much support as everyone else. This is often forgotten because of the stigmatization that surrounds drug use. The focus for far too long has been on the legality of these substances, with those who are struggling to function on a daily basis being ostracized because taking drugs is their only escape. If we are really to make a difference, we need to recognize that taking drugs is not a lifestyle choice, like some will have us believe, but rather an illness that can be treated. Today, we challenge these opinions, and we will demonstrate how providing alternatives to illegal street drugs can reduce demand on services, reduce the organized crime market, but most importantly, save lives. Last year alone, 4,393 people lost their lives to drug poisoning in England and Wales, with 30% of these deaths being caused by heroin and methadone. The market is currently in the hands of criminals who are continually exploiting vulnerable people. This includes the exploitation of children and young people who are being exploited through the county lines, so-called business model. The overall priority of my police and crime plan is to reduce the exploitation of vulnerable people. and in doing this, focusing on tackling organised crime, modern slavery, and making our neighbourhoods safer. When consulting with members of the North Wales public, I have received comments suggesting that drugs aren't an issue here and that organised crime is something found in the bigger cities. Unfortunately, as many of you listening today will know, drugs use is prominent in this area. The close proximity to the northwest of England has resulted in organised crime groups infiltrating their businesses into North Wales, with a high number but reducing number of county line models being used across the region. Drug use is predominantly found along the North Wales coastline and in and around Wrexham. It is estimated that the North Wales county lines market receives £32 million every year, resulting in the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Harm reduction is key to changing perspectives and providing support for the most vulnerable in our society. I am extremely encouraged by the interest from North Wales police officers to administer naloxone to prevent the number of overdose deaths in North Wales. I'm very proud of the first 12 officers that have been trained and now carry naloxone with them at all times. I also commission a number of services that consider harm reduction surrounding drug use, and I'm working closely with partners and agencies to explore the benefits of implementing an overdose prevention site here, similar to the services in Glasgow. And I'd like to welcome George from Glasgow. I think he's on the conference today, and congratulate him on his innovation and the hard work that he does in saving lives in Glasgow. In addition to my harm reduction work, my Checkpoint Cymru programme provides offenders with the opportunity to address the underlying issues of their offending behaviour and divert them away from the criminal justice system. This includes those found in possession of substances for personal use. Today's focus, however, is on heroin assisted treatment. And whilst it is called a treatment, it also reduces harm. It is easy for us to say that problematic drug users should go into treatment. It is easier said than done for the majority of users, and until they are ready, I believe that we should still support them with harm reduction as well as treatment opportunities. I believe that a successful heroin-assisted treatment program will have 5 aims. Number 1, saving lives and raise the individual's quality of life expectations. Secondly, enhance the quality of life of close family and friends and reduce the negative impact of adverse childhood experiences. Thirdly, a community benefit in that it reduces incidents of dangerous drug litter and antisocial behaviour and reduces fear of crime in our local communities. Fourthly, and as I'm sure Professor Strang will talk about later, it will reduce crime, as there will be no need to commit crime to buy illegal street drugs. And finally, it will reduce the size of the illegal opioid market. I'm not naive enough to believe that it will do away with it. Any reduction in the opioid market will undoubtedly have a positive impact on safeguarding those exploited via county lines and that associated violence. As part of today's conference, I will be launching my drugs policy, which provides options and recommendations on how we can reduce drug deaths, provide additional services, and reduce demand in North Wales. The policy will be published on my website and also shared via email to all who signed up to today's event. Prior to writing this policy, myself and the now Chief Constable of South Wales Police presented our thoughts on harm reduction to Welsh Government officials at the Policing Board for Wales, which was then chaired by the Deputy First Minister, Jane Hutt. But I'm sure one of our speakers today, Tracey Breheny, will elaborate on that and the Welsh Government substance abuse strategy. Tracey is the Deputy Director for Mental Health, Substance Misuse and Vulnerable Groups for the Welsh Government. We have 4 speakers today, and I'm thrilled to welcome them all. Each of them will share with you different perspectives around heroin-assisted treatment and how it proven to be beneficial to the individual and the wider community. Our keynote speaker today is Professor Sir John Strang, who is the Director of the National Addiction Centre and Head of the Addictions Department at King's College London. Sir John has extensive knowledge within this field and has published over 500 papers and chapters around addiction. We will also be joined by George Charlton, who founded the George Charlton Training and Consultancy, and who is at the centre of some excellent preventative work that is ongoing in the northeast of England. Our final speaker is Daniel Ahmed, who is the clinical partner of the pilot Heroin Assisted Treatment Facility in Middlesbrough. This facility is now funded for a second year by the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland, as was Barry Coppinger. I'm sure we look forward to Danny's presentation on the first year's evaluation of the Middlesbrough pilot. Before I hand over to our first speaker this morning, I wanted to make you all aware that if you have any questions during the conference, please use the Q&A function and we will answer questions at the end of the presentations. I very much hope you all enjoy today's conference, and I hope to welcome you all to North Wales in the future. I would now like to hand over to Tracey Breheny from the Welsh Government. Diolch yn fawr pawb.
Thank you. Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to the North Wales Police and Crime Commissioner for inviting me to be part of this conversation and conference today as a representative of the Welsh Government. As Arfon has mentioned, the focus of my element of today will be quite strategic in nature and focus on our substance misuse strategy in Wales. But I will come on at the end to talk a bit about heroin assisted treatment and the Welsh Government's position on that. So I think where I should start would be to outline really some of the kind of key developments this year on our substance misuse delivery plan for Wales, particularly, and with your permission, I was going to talk a bit about the response that we have seen this year in response to COVID and the impact that that has had on the substance misuse population and services. So Helen, I think I can't see my own slides here, but I'm hoping that I'm on slide 2. So I'd like to really start by reinforcing the Welsh Government Minister's commitment to tackling the harms caused by substance misuse, which I think is demonstrated through the almost £54 million invested annually through our 7 area planning boards in Wales. It's probably worth noting that that substance misuse budget within the Welsh Government has been protected and then actually increased by 10% last year, just at a time when there's been obviously significant budget pressures. So I think ministers would stress that that demonstrates the commitment in Wales. So the current substance misuse, thank you, Helen, I can see the presentation now. The current substance misuse delivery plan covers the 29 to 22 3-year period, and it builds on the achievements of a 10-year substance misuse strategy that ran from 2008 to 2018. So the latest plan confirms that from a government perspective, harm reduction continues to remain an overall principle, with a number of key priorities set out for ourselves and for our partners for the next three years. So amongst those priority areas, it includes tackling the barriers of co-occurring mental health and substance misuse, where we all know that service users can fall through the cracks of those particular 2 services, of supporting people with highly complex needs who may well be homeless and ensuring that the right substance misuse services are delivered at the right time for individuals on a consistent basis. We're also very keen in the next 3 years to tackle, to ensure rather that there's an equity of service access irrespective of location across Wales, because that has been an issue and has been something that has been highlighted from Health Inspectorate Wales reports, for example. So the delivery plan areas that are outlined in the latest plan were tested. They were subject to an extensive consultation exercise and tested with substance misuse commissioners, service providers and service users, most importantly, last year. And therefore we're fairly confident from that they're the right areas in which to prioritise our work and the work of working with partners over the next 3-year periods. But whilst it's important to be clear that in setting out these areas of priority, we absolutely understand the importance of services being able to remain agile. And on that basis, we have said that the Welsh Government will continue to review the plan regularly. Indeed, the impact this year of COVID has provided us all, I think, with the unanticipated reminder of just how important it is to be able to respond quickly and reprioritise as necessary substance misuse services in Wales. And in light of that, we will be releasing shortly a refreshed delivery plan that will just have strengthened certain areas which I was going to talk about briefly as part of this. So substance misuse services, and in particular opiate substance treatment and the availability of that, was very early on, one of the first things that we did was to designate OST as one of the NHS's essential services across Wales. And what that meant was that was the Welsh Government basically providing advice to the NHS to say these services must remain available even in the context of obviously very challenging period throughout the pandemic. So this protected the provision of that service at a time when others may well have been stood down. And this enabled us to continue delivering those services across Wales to a wide range of individuals despite the pandemic. I think it's very important. I think certainly in March and April, a number of us were very worried that the substance misuse population could well have been one of the first ones to fall foul, if you like, of the impact of the pandemic, and would not be on people's radar in the way that we would want. So that was quite an important development. Helen, I think we're on slide 3. So as I just mentioned, the ongoing delivery of services has remained the key focus throughout this period. And I thought I would just really quickly share with you some of the examples of actions that we've taken since March, April. So one of the first things that we did was to agree very quickly the annual Substance Misuse Action Fund for Wales, and I mentioned the £54 million that goes into this budget across Wales, and approving that very quickly and releasing that funding was crucial because that enabled our 7 area planning boards, which obviously are the ones in the front line and the organisations charged with commissioning and delivering substance misuse services across Wales. So it enabled our area planning boards to focus on the immediate challenges back in March and April. We then had to set about developing a variety of guidance documents to support this most vulnerable group. So this included new guidance to those who were homeless, those leaving the prison estate, and those in need of mental health support. The other area that we needed to look at was to recognise the digital platforms. Because of the COVID restrictions, recognising the role of digital platforms in this was really important. And we reviewed and strengthened our DAN 24/7 drug and alcohol support helpline so that people could access that support and we could get that support to the widest possible numbers of those in need. And since that time, we've been focusing really with our partners in the area planning boards and providers on what the recovery of substance misuse services needs to look like across Wales, and how we can ensure really that services can remain dynamic and agile to what we know will be a changing landscape, certainly through the coming winter period. So I think we're on slide 4 now, Helen. Thank you. Another area of the substance misuse delivery plan for Wales that we strengthened has been to look at some of our health-focused employability support. So we extended a scheme called our Out of Work Peer Mentoring Scheme, which supports those with substance misuse and or mental health issues to gain access for training and employment. And I think the climate that obviously we're in economically now makes that programme more important than ever, given that those individuals are often the furthest away from the labour market, and certainly the furthest away from sometimes DWP mainstream support. So Arfon mentioned drug-related deaths, and obviously during this period, closely monitoring the trends around these deaths is absolutely key. And we've recently, in partnership with the police, our police colleagues, we've reinvigorated our National Implementation Board for Drug Poisoning Prevention, so that we've got a much greater focus on driving any national actions that need to happen, which have been informed then by our local evidence coming through from our 7 area planning boards. So we're on slide 5, Helen. At this point, I just wanted to concentrate a little on the role of opiate substitution treatment, and which has always really been a key part of our substance misuse response in Wales. However, as I mentioned, from the start of the pandemic period, ensuring the ongoing provision of this service we knew would be vitally important, and therefore this was an area that we concentrated on early on. It was also very apparent at the early part of this year that substance misuse services generally were under a great deal of pressure given the impacts of COVID. And therefore, Welsh ministers took a very early decision to support the national rollout in Wales of something called Buvidal, which, as many on this call will know, is a long-acting buprenorphine injection provided on a monthly basis. This development, which was widely supported by partners in the 7 area planning boards in Wales and their respective commissioned service providers, has enabled us to offer this new treatment across Wales, and we've expanded this support now to criminal justice services. So now, at this point, over 400 people across Wales are benefiting from this treatment. Regionally, I know that in North Wales, we've seen a steady increase in the take-up of this intervention, and to date, over 60 individuals in North Wales are currently engaged in our Buvidal provision. So whilst we're closely monitoring the delivery of this, we've already received really encouraging feedback about its impact, not least in terms of improved outcomes for many of the most vulnerable and complex of our service users. So properly understanding the effectiveness of Buvidal will of course be key, and therefore we've commissioned a rapid evaluation review so that we can fully understand the impact and help us to make decisions about the next future developments in that area. So we're on the next one, Helen, thank you. I briefly here just wanted to mention drug-related deaths and reiterate really that reducing drug-related deaths has and will continue to be the main Welsh Government priority for the work being done to tackle substance misuse in Wales. So whilst recently published data indicates that we have seen a 21% reduction across Wales in 2019, which of course predated COVID in terms of the data, and which of course we do welcome, but we know that pockets exist throughout our communities where this is not the case and those reductions have not happened. So in North Wales, sadly, I know that there was a slight increase from 36 drug-related deaths in 2018 to 39 in 2019, mainly due, I believe, to the increases in Wrexham and the Anglesey areas. But I would stress that, of course, it's important to focus on trends here, given the low, thankful, low overall numbers that we see in Wales. So we know that all of our area planning boards, together with local partners, are now analysing the data behind these deaths in their regions so that they can develop responses that are evidence-based and which meet local needs. And I've just mentioned the board that we have in place, which means that alongside our police colleagues, we have a mechanism to escalate any national level actions that we need to take as Welsh Government to respond to those issues. So we've really welcomed in recent months the continued involvement of police colleagues as we know that, as Arfon mentioned in the introduction, disrupting the organised crime and supplies of drugs is of course critical to our ability to tackle substance misuse in Wales. And I just wanted to quickly mention the UK Drugs Summit that was held in February of this year in Glasgow. And from that, there's been quite significant ongoing ministerial communication across the 4 nations. And I think if people have not had the opportunity, although I suspect many on this call will have done, I would encourage you to have a look at the findings of the stage 1 findings of Dame Carol Black's independent review of drugs. And we're working closely now with the Home Office, Scottish Government and other colleagues in taking forward new actions as a result of that. So we're on slide 7, Helen, please. As part of this, I just wanted to highlight, and the slide highlights, some of the actions in our new delivery plan, which underline the importance of viewing substance misuse as a cross-government issue and ensuring that inequalities are tackled where they exist. So just starting with the area of housing, the Welsh Government invested over £40 million this year to support everyone who is homeless and to try to get them off the streets, particularly in light of the pandemic, and into accommodation. So this resulted in the rapid housing of 2,200 people across Wales in response to the pandemic. But of course, this now requires ongoing support for these people, many of whom have highly complex needs, which I know is currently presenting substance misuse services across Wales with particular challenges. So we're well aware that those who we collectively support through a range of public services are often those with the most complex needs. And one of the clear lessons from the COVID response has been the importance of Welsh Government support for and local action to have integrated wraparound support, which we know is so critical to the lives and supporting the individuals to make the positive changes in their lives. Turning really quickly onto the issue of inequalities, the disproportionate way that COVID has affected certain groups has also shone a light, I think, on the equitable and effective provision of substance misuse services in Wales. In June, I think many people will be aware, a report on the impacts of COVID on the BAME community was published, and the Welsh Government ministers have been very clear that every part of government has a responsibility to strengthen our focus on this issue. So these inequalities apply just as much within the substance misuse service area as any other, and we're going to be continuing to work with our area planning boards in Wales to ensure that services are accessible for all. So for example, we're acutely aware that access to services by members of the BAME community is low, and there are complex factors that contribute to this. And on gender issues, for example, we also know that there's a significant and worrying upward trend in drug-related deaths amongst women. So it's just a couple of examples there. Of course, there are more where we need to look at not just the overall provision of substance misuse services, but access by key underrepresented groups. So I think we're on to the next slide, Helen, thank you. So having concentrated so far on kind of the Welsh Government's wider strategic policy perspective, I know that of course today's conference is about heroin assisted treatment and the role that that could play in improving outcomes for this vulnerable group. There's been a great deal of interest in this from some partners across Wales, and not least of course from the North Wales Police and Crime Commissioner. And as a result, Welsh Government agreed earlier this year that we needed to clarify and set out our position on this issue. So a letter was issued from Welsh Government in March 2020 and shared with the area planning boards across Wales and with our Police and Crime Commissioner offices and other key partners. So the Welsh Government's correspondence made it clear, and I'll quote here because it's probably the simplest way of doing that, but made it clear that a decision on the implementation of a heroin assisted treatment service would need to be informed by the views of the relevant substance misuse area planning board, working with its partners, in particular the police and criminal justice sector. Any proposal would need to balance the cost of trialling a heroin assisted treatment against its potential effectiveness in that geographic area, alongside investment in existing services, some of which I've just talked about. The Welsh Government has made it clear that, therefore, we expect area planning boards to give its introduction careful consideration to ensure that a HAT programme could be delivered effectively within clinical governance frameworks and represents value for money. So I think in concluding, I'm sure that today's conversations will be a really important start of that ongoing dialogue, rather, that's happening in North Wales on this issue. And I know that in other area planning board areas, there is interest in this. At a national level, we had a really interesting presentation and discussion with the team from Glasgow leading on the enhanced drug treatment services there back in July, for example. And we understand that HAT as an option is an evidence-based approach. And I'm sure that the expert contributions later today will be really informative about that. However, we also understand and know that this is an area of treatment that's undoubtedly controversial and based on evidence used only for a small cohort of individuals who may not have responded well to other treatments. So by its very nature, and given the requirements to offer supervised consumption, it's also can be expensive. So I've no doubt that there's going to be some lively debate on this following today's conference, but it's to the credit really of partners in North Wales that all avenues are being explored in this way to help some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And from a Welsh Government perspective, I just wanted to stress that we will look forward to receiving the feedback from today's discussion, and are committed to continue working with the partners, with all partners on this through the North Wales Area Planning Board mechanism. So just to conclude, I really just wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of today's conference. It's certainly these unprecedented times that we're all living in has underlined the importance of partnership working. And I think we're very fortunate in Wales that we have such strong partnership working, and we really look forward to the ongoing discussion on this. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Tracey. Thank you very much. I know, Tracey, you're not able to stay with us for the full programme this morning, but if you're okay, just for a few moments or two, we have had a couple of questions asked by attendees via the chat function. If you're okay.
That's fine. I've got a few minutes, Steve, if that's all right. I'm really sorry that I couldn't stay, but two of my colleagues are staying for the whole session, and very happy then to pick up anything afterwards as well.
That's fine, thank you. So the first question comes from Martin Powell, and I'll read the question verbatim if I may. So, safer drug consumption rooms are used in other countries to reduce drug-related deaths, which you spoke about, Tracey, by engaging the most vulnerable people who use drugs before moving them on to support, including sometimes heroin-assisted treatments. The Welsh Government asked its scientific advisors, OPCC, to look at drug consumption rooms in December 2017. It is recommended that it would be appropriate to undertake a feasibility study to inform decisions about possible implementation. So the question from Martin is, when will this feasibility study on drug consumption rooms be commissioned?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct in terms. So everyone, I think, on this call will know that it's really it's a very complex area legally in terms of enhanced consumption rooms, and there are many things that would need to be overcome, not least the fact that responsibility and the legislation around this is reserved to the UK government. But in answer to the point about the opossum work. I mean, that feasibility study would be the next step. It would be something that we would need to, we've got a new minister, I should have mentioned this perhaps at the beginning, a new minister in Welsh Government for mental health and well-being, who also has responsibility now for substance misuse. So obviously that would be a conversation that would be had. She's been in post just over a week as part of that. So, but that was the recommendation from Opossum, that they could not conclude and provide advice at the time that we would need to have a further study.
Thank you, and thanks to Martin for raising that question. And the final one, Tracey, before you do leave us, is from Mr. Hibbs. How do you increase the motivation of service users to access services, and which services in particular would you like to make more attractive to users?
I suppose, Steve, as I said, obviously I'm not a frontline service provider, and I think service providers are probably much better placed than I would be to answer that particular question. But I think, you know, what I would say, so we're very happy, as I said, to come back on that, but what I would say is certainly one thing we learned from the COVID response is that, and almost the silver lining from that, was the way in which service users need integrated wraparound services that are easily accessible to them. And I think what we saw in March and April, particularly because of the rehousing of the homeless population and the emergency responses, we did see some of that happening in a way that hadn't happened, frankly, previously. Certainly mental health provision, for example, being provided in a more integrated way with substance misuse services, which is what you would need. So I would say that certainly came through as something that we really need to keep hold of and not lose as we now move into the next sort of stage, really.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that's probably a theme that will come up throughout the morning, I think. Tracey, thank you for your time this morning. Really grateful. I think on behalf of policing in Wales, I suppose, I think the partnership working that we've seen over the last few months between policing in Wales and Welsh Government in the response to the pandemic, it really has been fantastic, and long may it continue. So thank you for your time this morning and for your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with no further ado, if we move on, and the next item on the agenda, I'm sure will be an absolute treat. Really looking forward to this. Can I introduce you all to George Charlton, please? As Arfon said earlier, the founder of the George Charlton Training and Consultancy. George, looking forward to this. Over to you.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, okay, 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen. So, Stephen, can you just confirm that you can see my PowerPoint, please?
I can indeed, George. Yep.
Cool. 1 second. Sorry. It's going to go wrong for anyone.
We've lost them again now, George. We've got you.
Just bear with us a second, Stephen.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, Stephen, are we good?
We're good to go. Thanks, George.
Okay, so what I should say is Bore da, pawb, shwmae, and diolch Arfon for asking us to speak at today's event. Some of you guys might know me, some of you might not. The idea that I'm a founder of George Charlton Training Consultancy Services sounds really grand, but in reality, I'm an independent trainer and consultant. I work on lots of projects across the UK. working with police forces, training police officers to ensure that trauma informed and ACE aware. Do a lot of work in schools, primary schools, secondary schools, educating young people around the harms of drugs. Not adopting a just say no approach, because that doesn't work. It's more important to give them the KNOW, the knowledge to make informed choices. Also work up and down the country as teaching practitioners, community reinforcement and family training, which is a wonderful evidence-based approach, which believes that family members are the best resource for change for people who use drugs. And the project like I'm absolutely mad about is this stuff, developing peer-to-peer naloxone training and supply programs. So working currently with foundations in Middlesbrough, working nationally with We Are With You, who are rolling this out, which is brilliant, working with Cranstown and lots of other bits and pieces in the pipeline around naloxone. Naloxone is really important, man, because it keeps people alive. So over the next 40 minutes, I'm not going to talk about heroin-assisted treatment per se. We've got two absolute legends, Danny Ahmed, who's going to do a wonderful presentation about the effectiveness of the heroin-assisted treatment program in Middlesbrough, and also Professor John Strang, who kind of absolutely needs no introduction. But I am going to talk about my area of expertise, which is somebody who's been stigmatized, demonized, traumatized, and felt the pain of our failed war on drugs. It feels important to put a trigger warning on here, and to make it clear that my presentation is gonna have bad language in it. It's gonna have talk of abuse. I'm gonna get a bit angry at times, because I'm really passionate about this, and it's lush to hear Tracey and the Welsh Government and Arfon and everyone else get behind this idea that we're going to support heroin-assisted treatment. I hope everyone who's watching the call supports heroin-assisted treatment, because why wouldn't we be supporting an evidence-based intervention that works? But be aware that kind of over the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes of my presentation, I'm going to speak passionately and honestly. I might even commit corporate suicide today, who knows? But we'll see where we're getting to, man. So the starting point, right? I'm conscious that we had Boris on the telly on Saturday night, made me late for come down with me, talking about follow the evidence, right? It's crucial we follow the evidence, we follow the guidance, we have to listen to the science. But what's mad is when it comes to drugs and drug law reform, we don't follow the science and we don't follow the evidence. The government ignores its own advisors, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, who've talked about heroin-assisted treatment, who've talked about drug consumption rooms. And Arfon, you said George in Glasgow earlier, it's actually Peter. And Peter, if you're watching, right, everyone on this call salutes you for what you're doing, brother, right? Everyone salutes you, right? But the starting point needs to be that heroin-assisted treatment is an evidence-based intervention, which isn't a new thing. Well, it's a new thing to this country, but it's been referenced within the Clinical Guidelines for Substance Misuse Management, the Orange Book, like forever, right? And what I want to do is I just want to read something, if I may, from somebody who knows a thing or two about heroin-assisted treatment, well, about treatment in general. So the right treatment at the right time can be life-saving. It can also make a huge difference to the well-being and recovery of people with problems related to their drug use. The clinical guidelines are designed to support you in meeting your responsibility to ensure evidence-based treatments are available and competently delivered. And you know what? We have got wonderful like OST, which is happening. We've got great interventions, which is being delivered by the providers. You know, this isn't a dig at anyone, at providers or anything. This is just me being honest, right? But when it comes to having the right kind of interventions, we only have heroin-assisted treatment in Glasgow and in Middlesbrough. Two of these things. Guidelines guide. They are not intended to dictate the precise treatment for each patient. Rather, they're designed to guide the clinician and the commissioner in providing the right balance of interventions. I don't think 2 heroin-assisted treatment programs is the right balance of interventions. Talks about we which have the greatest likelihood to produce individual benefit and public good. And you know, man, like, we know these interventions work. Danny's going to talk to you later on about the project that he pulled together at Foundation. We know it works. So it's not a case of whether it works or it doesn't work. We know it works, so let's just do it. The evidence, it says on this slide, the evidence has been shown, is systematically reviewed in recent publications and its cost effectiveness. And one of the things that Tracey mentioned earlier was like looking at the cost effectiveness of something like heroin assisted treatment, right? But what we need to take into account is that like, we're prepared to criminalize people for taking drugs, for using drugs, and put them in jail for a sum of what, 45, 50,000 pounds a year, where there's no rehabilitation happens, and what does that cost? Around 12,000 pounds per year per person. So you could put 5 people through the heroin assisted treatment program for the cost of sending 1 person to prison. Because it seems to me that when it comes to drug users and people who take drugs, right, it's about good people don't take drugs. People who take drugs are bad people or evil people. And as a result of that, we've created an underclass. Like, look at these headings, these headlines, like Britain's zombie drug use epidemic, like Stockton food bank dealers swapping vouchers for drugs, jailed mum who tied up a junkie daughter. Like, it's in the Independent there, it says, what's the point in just locking up these junkies? Like, what the fuck's going on here? How can we think that it's appropriate to talk about people like that? And you see these bottom pictures, the bottom 3 on the left, like, nobody seems to give a shit anymore. It seems to me that we're trying to make it harder for people who use drugs. Like this picture on the bottom left-hand corner with a bus in the background, right? That's a place called Hippie Green in Newcastle. And those people there just going about their daily business while there's a guy dying on the floor. The slide next to it, the isolation in that picture of that man there, like, I've got goosebumps now, man, when I look at that. Like, do we care? Do you care about that? Because if you care about pictures like this, the solutions are in front of us, but we need to cut through all the bullshit. What am I making this too simple? Like, is it? Well, it needs to be kept simple because people are dying. And people who do care, though, are represented in that next picture with one drug user leaning over another to see if his mate's okay. You know, that's what we do. That's what Peter's doing in Glasgow. Well, we're not saying that you don't care, but we have to show that we care more than just in our words, but through our actions. And that's why today's conference is really important. Because heroin-assisted treatment's a no-brainer. It can be done. We've got the template. We're doing it here now, today, and yesterday, and Saturday, and Friday, and Thursday, every day for the last, getting on to like 18 months probably. It's already being done. So let's lift the template and do it. And then this picture on the right, far right, a man lying there. Is he alive? Is he dead? It seems to me the road sweep is giving more attention to the rubbish on the ground than that piece of shit lying on the floor there. Because you know what? Like, we've created an underclass. I'm rattling inside, you know. I'm shaking. And that's like, that's born out of like, just the pain I feel for people who are living in environments like this. So I took this picture last week when I was out with the Foundation's Harm Reduction Union, the Loch Zone peers. Somebody asked earlier, Richard asked earlier about kind of how do you motivate people to come to treatment. Forget about motivating people to come to treatment, take the treatment out of them. Go to places where people who use drugs are, because that's where we go. And if we come across people in these environments, then what we do is we pick up the phone and we make a call on their behalf to the organisation and say, we've got somebody here, can we have an appointment? And it's yes. We don't just hand over mobile phone numbers, man. We hand over mobile phone numbers to people who haven't got phones. We're fining people for possession of drugs when they haven't got any money to pay the fine, so they're going to jail. Mental health services won't touch people who use drugs until they get clean. If you use drugs, then we're going to stop your script. What else is on here? We're going to lock the sick in cages. Sick people, let's lock them up. Spend 50 grand a year on it. When we know we've got a valid treatment intervention that costs 12,000, that's going to set somebody free and give them their life back. But what we do as a society is we want to make it more difficult for people to live in this. Consider that. If you're not looking at that, feeling uncomfortable, you're part of the problem here. And I pray to God that that naloxone kit that's lying there, I pray to God it was used and the person it was used on, their life was saved. Because it's all good talking about, like, nationally about, oh, our response to this, that, and the other. When COVID came along, what was absolutely beautiful to see, right, was the co-production, the way all of the services came together. We are Barrod, you know, Kaleidoscope, Change, Grow, Live, We Are With You. Like all of you guys just absolutely came together, and the response has been absolutely fantastic. You know, things changed really quickly, you know, like the Lord Advocate in Scotland said, oh, look, well, we're going to change the law so anybody can supply naloxone, like in host and supply. We can change stuff like that if we want to, because we just can. We've proved that we can. But this is the reality here for people who use drugs. This is somebody's home. I think it's terrible, man, because the outcome for people using like this is that people die. Thanks, Russell Newcomb, for sending these graphs through, you know. I don't want to talk too specifically about these. The graph on the left, for me, looks like a stairway to heaven. And what we know is that 4,393 deaths in England and Wales last year. These deaths have risen year on year for the last 8 years. And these deaths this year were the highest recorded since 1993, right? We know that deprivation is responsible, in many parts responsible for drug-related deaths. And there's nowhere more deprived on the index of deprivation than where we are in Middlesbrough and Teesside. You're more likely to die of a drug-related death here than you are a car accident. But you know what we do, right? Einstein said, right, Monday morning, and Einstein said a definition of insanity is to repeat the same behavior and expect different results. But you know what we're doing? We're repeating the same behavior and we're expecting different results. We're doing the same thing day in, day out. We're going to do another review. We need to do another evaluation. Well, do your reviews, do your evaluations. But by the end of the day, 15 people have died of a drug-related death. 15 people died yesterday. 15 people died tomorrow. And over half of all them deaths involved an opiate. So we know projects like heroin assisted treatment are going to reduce that. We know that putting naloxone out into the community and flooding the place is going to keep people alive long enough, right? We know the solutions are there, so why are we still talking about this? So it's great that we're talking about it today, though. Arfon, I hope you're not regretting asking. It's like, it is what it is. But the people we care about are dying. And then this, right? So I think it's perverse, actually, the way that we stigmatize, demonize, punish, shame, make life difficult for people who use drugs. You know, people who use drugs are frightened to be honest with the clinicians in case they get their script stopped. That's why we lie. You know, some places they say, hey, oh, you're 10 minutes late, I can't see you. You need to show some motivation. Show some motivation. Do you know what motivation is to go from that picture that I've just shown you before to walk a mile up to a treatment centre when you're rattling and you get there 10 minutes late and they don't see you? I think that person's motivation is absolutely fine. I think there's something gone wrong where we're making it difficult for the most vulnerable people in our society. And if you're not supporting harm prevention, you're absolutely supporting harm, right? So what happens is, right, when people get fed up, like Peter Crichton's done in Glasgow, right, when he's sick and tired of seeing all of those deaths and the rise in HIV and AIDS, what he does, right, is he wants to go out and make a difference. And it's not bad enough that we punish drug users. Now we punish the people who want to save their lives. So he gets charged, right? he gets charged for trying to keep people alive. God, man, something gone seriously wrong, hasn't it? At least I think that has. I wasn't born a drug addict. I hate the term drug addict. We're people who use drugs, you know. I was just born a young lad into a loving family. And I look at this picture here. I look like Austin Powers' love child. I think that little joke that I always took in there is about rescuing me rather than you. I'm on my second-hand grifter that I got for Christmas in a house where there was lots of love. But I remember how that kid felt, and he didn't feel good enough, and he felt frightened, and he was unsure of himself, unsure of the world that he lived in. He didn't feel the way that other kids looked. When his mates used to play together and interact, they looked really confident, but he didn't feel like that. In the junior school I went to, they used to hit you with wooden sticks across your hands and your legs. It was really scary, man, to get hit when you are probably the same age as my daughter, a bit younger. In fact, Madison's what, 11? I was being hit younger than 11 by teachers. I suffered a lot of bullying because of my big hair and my big glasses. I think I'm still wearing the same glasses now, 47 years on, pretty much. I went to a Catholic school, a senior school, where they administered fucking discipline with leather straps across your hands, right? Like fucking grown men hitting you as hard as they could, man, smashing your fucking hands for nothing. For nothing, man. And these men, right, and women who used to bray you got off on it, man, I'm sure. Like, in what way does hitting a child, like, do anything? You know, that's abuse, what happened in that school, right? I was physically abused in that school and emotionally abused in that school for years. I was told I would never amount to anything, that I was hopeless. You internalize these things as a young person. You know, when I was 15, I got caught smoking a cigarette at the bus station. I was standing at the bus station smoking a fag, and the PE teacher drove past just as I was taking a draw of a cigarette, and he seen us, right? And he didn't stop the car, he just pointed and he drove on. And I was ill. Instantly, I thought, shit, man, I'm in trouble. Do you know what I mean? My mum and dad are going to find out I'm smoking. Like, I'm going to end up getting hit. I knew I was going to end up getting hit. So I went home that night and made myself vomit in front of my parents, because if you're sick, you don't have to go to school. And I vomited the next day and the next day. And, you know, I was off school for a week. And in the end, the doctor said he just needs to go back to school. And when I went back to school and went into his PE lesson with all of my peers, 30 young lads, 15-year-old, he come and said, Charlton, I seen you smoking, son. You need to be punished. And I said, sir, I wasn't smoking. And I'm helplessly going in my blazer pocket to get some candy tabs out to try and lie my way out of an assault. He said, no, son, I seen you smoking, you're going to get punished. And he was a bit weird. I'll leave his name out of it, right? He's a bit weird, this guy, because in his PE class, you weren't allowed to wear underpants under your PE shorts. So he made me, he asked all the lads to lift their shoes up so he could see the soles of their feet. And he was looking for the thickest sole trainer he could find, and it was on a lad called Pete Smith, and he had high-tech silver shadow, and anyone of my age, you'll know that they've got some chunky heels on them. And he made me stand up in the middle of the gym with all my peers around me, and he made us take my shorts down. Now, bearing in mind at that time, 15, I was late in terms of puberty, and he made me bend over while he fucking braided me with that shoe on my arse. And I used to wonder what was worse, you know. Was it the pain of that man hitting us, or was it my peers seeing me with a small penis? I know what it was, because that man could have fucking hit me forever. So the sexual degradation I got in that school, all this stuff was happening before I ever took a drug, man. I was broken. And what I was experiencing was adverse childhood experiences and traumas. And what we know, compared with people with no adverse childhood experiences, those with 4 or more are 11 times more likely to have used illicit drugs, are 11 times more likely to have been incarcerated, are 7 times more likely to have been involved in violence. So, you know, when we stigmatize and demonize and judge these fucking people who use drugs, well, we're judging this kid here. We're making it difficult for him. And where we end up is there. Like, I was in a conference once when I heard the question asked, what do you do with a fucking person who's lost their soul? And that's what that picture represents there for me, is a person who's absolutely lost their soul. And what we do with him, right, is we tell him he's the scum of the earth. He's a piece of shit. You know, like when I first took a drug, man, right, at the age of about, well, the first drug I had was tobacco, and that's the legal regulated drug, crazy, yeah? And then the next drug was alcohol. Well, that kills loads and loads of people, doesn't it? But that's a legal and regulated drug. But yeah, cannabis isn't, which doesn't really kill anybody. The misuse of drugs, it's fucked up, man, because we're criminalizing people for taking drugs which are less harmful than bloody alcohol. Madness, but anyway, that's a different presentation, that, isn't it? So the first drug I ever took, though, was cannabis. And what cannabis did for me, it settled us. You see, I've definitely got some undiagnosed ADHD going on me, but when I took cannabis, it settled us. When I took alcohol, I became a bit more relaxed. When I used amphetamines for the first time, I wasn't looking at people I knew people by the shoes at the wall because I couldn't look in the eyes because I didn't have the confidence. Them schools stripped that out of us. But when I took amphetamines, I could look you in the eyes. I could talk to the lasses. I became a canny dancer. Surely drugs aren't the problem, man. They were my solution for a while, until you end up where your drug of choice is more of anything you can get your hands on. And society tells you now, we're not afraid to tell that face there what we think of him. Piece of shit, waste of space, you're a crap dad. Your marriage is failing. You'd be better off if you weren't here. And you end up getting razor blades and fucking trimming away at them so you can put them through your fucking skin. Do you not think I know the things you tell me about me? I know that. But this is the face of a broken soul, man. Like Johann Hari on the end of one of his TED Talks says, for 100 years we've been shouting war songs about addicts when all along we should have been singing love songs to them. And I couldn't agree more, because for a decade, right? For a decade I was lost. And the only people who didn't, I was never asked. No, Gabo Mate says not why the addiction, but why the pain. Nobody focused on the root causes of why I was doing what I was doing. And the only people who didn't give up on me were these guys, my parents. What we know is for every one person using substances across the UK, there's 3 to 4 family members who are directly affected. Like everyone said to them, show them tough love. Tough love isn't love. Love is love. Don't go down with a sinking ship. Cut them off. Disconnect. Another example of this fucking perverse world we live in, where we think broken people, we need to just disconnect from them. We don't. We need to show them love and compassion and support. Oh, you can't love your clients, it's unprofessional. Well, I'll tell you what, me the most unprofessional man in England then. Because I love the clients that I work with, and I make sure that they know it. They trust me, and I trust them. We've professionalized this thing into our lives where 15 people die every single day, but they never ever gave up hope. Addiction problems needs a health-based approach and can't be fixed through the criminal justice system. It's madness that we're putting. There's a 1 in 4 people currently in the UK criminal justice in prison are in prison for drugs offences, none of which are for dealing. I think that's madness, right? madness when we've got the solutions. And you know what, man, right? It was really reassuring to hear Tracey talk earlier about kind of the government's position around wanting to do this. It's really fantastic to think that you've got the area planning boards who are going to hopefully get on board with this. It's fantastic that we've got like Arfon absolutely leading the charge. It's awesome, man. So I didn't get well using heroin assisted treatment. It was another intervention for me. It was another right treatment intervention for me that got me well. And these three pictures here, the one on the left, which is me at Madame Tussauds in Blackpool with Joanna Lumley, not really, it's the Guildhall in London, was real validation for me. This award was for helping people who use drugs to use education to get well. You know, the acceptance I felt on that day that just these all them teachers were wrong about me. And the picture on the right, you know, getting me masters and being able to spend that with, to share that with me dad. No words, man. A daft lad from heaven. Nee GCSE's nout, but he gets a masters. And then the picture in the middle, you know, which represents how lucky I am. My beautiful wife Kerry, and Charlotte in the back, and little Madison. A second chance, man. Why are we robbing people the opportunities for second chances? It's too much, man. So, when you give people the right treatment options, we've got about 5 more slides and that's me done. When you give people the right treatment options, right, like heroin assisted treatment, you allow us to love and take care of the people who look after us. My dad, he's got dementia, he's not well. He thinks he's living in Chesterfield. He lives only 4 minutes away from me in Durham. He never gave up on me and I'll never give up on him. And I love him and I do it out of a sense, not of obligation, because I love him, because you know what, right? Like, I was never a bad person. I had a debate about which t-shirt to wear today. I've got so many different ones, and nice people take drugs had to be the t-shirt to wear today, because nice people take drugs, regardless of what the media tell you. When you give us access to the right treatment options like heroin assisted treatment, and we get well, right? And we move out of those places, like those filthy spaces where people are being forced to use drugs. They're being forced to use drugs there, by the way. We're forcing them to use drugs there because the Home Office ignores the guidance. And there's the reality. It's not against the law. Drug consumption rooms, 20 of them globally. We know the line, don't we? 20 of them globally, not a single death anywhere in the world, but no, we're not going to do that because we're still going to keep it really tough for people who use drugs. But when we get well, we go into schools and we educate young people about drugs and drug harms. The picture on the bottom left-hand corner with the kids on people's shoulders, that was a special educational needs school. All of them young people there, and I've got consent to say this, all them young people there have used a drug. Well, this picture was taken a year ago. All of them were using drugs, kids as young as 13. So when we say, oh no, just don't take drugs because it's going to hurt you, kids think that we have an agenda. We need to start to be talking from a place of truth. When you give us access to the right kind of treatment options, we use our experiences to work with cops and to educate cops. You know, like for me, right, it's fantastic to think and to see the role that police are playing currently, and police and crime commissioners across the UK in leading harm prevention. Is that leading it? They're driving it? Do you know what I mean? We've got amazing cops like Jason Harwin. We know the great work that he does with the Police Chief Council. Jason Hugh, Thames Valley, drug diversion schemes going on in there and in Durham. We've got young Scott Kelly there in Cleveland, Police Rob Bosson in Newcastle. Like, you know what, man, right? Like, there's some wonderful co-productions which are happening, man, right? It's absolutely amazing to see. That big picture with the Mike Barton, the top Chief Constable, retired Chief Constable of Durham Police. So they invited We Are the Loop to come and do a multi-agency safety testing in Durham in December. And I was involved in that work as a looper. I'm a looper. We Are the Loop. I'm mint, by the way. You need to get drug testing on the agenda next time, Arfon as well, right? Oh, we've already got some of that down there, I think. But that picture of Mike Barton me and him were stood next to each other when there was a student who brought in loads of different bags of drugs, right? He had a bag of MDMA, he had a bag of ketamine, and he had some tricks, right? And you know what Mike Bond did? Didn't bat an eyelid. He just said he was pleased to be in a position where these young people could get their drugs tested and not end up dying. And him and the legend that's Ron Hogg used to sit in rooms saying they didn't want to criminalise anybody for personal possession of drug use. You know, the checkpoint came there, and you know that picture there, big Ron, right? God, Ron, we miss you, man. We absolutely miss you. The first time I met Ron, I was in a room with him and Stephanie Kalili, and I thought I was walking into a room with a legend. Do you know what I mean? Me, an ex-drug user, and this guy. And so I was ill. I was anxious. And he looked across the table, and the first thing he said is, "What football team do you support?" I said, "Eh?" He said, "What football team do you support?" I thought, "Fucking hell." Sunderland. Well, he was a black and white. I wasn't here. I didn't know that. He said to Stephanie Kelly, he said, "Stephanie, get him out of the office. We don't have Mackems in here." Well, you know, Ron was a legend, man. And he is a legend. I promised him before he died that I would do everything I could to shout about kind of everything he stood for. Do you know what I mean? And one of them, if you've seen further, it's because you stand on the shoulders of giants, and there's no greater giant than Ron Hogg. And you know what, Arfon, I absolutely doff me cap for you, sir. I know you and him were pals as well, and he spoke fondly of you, right? And the role that Police and Crime Commissioners have in leading this debate is absolutely fantastic. Couple more slides. When you give us the right treatment options like heroin assisted treatment, we'll get well, go out and save the lives of our friends, right? So we've got wonderful peer-to-peer naloxone training and supply programs, which are happening in Middlesbrough, which are happening in Redcar. We've got them in Scotland. Do you know what I mean? There's lots of great work goes on. But what we have to do, right, is we have to examine, like, organisationally, are we showing some prejudice or some discrimination when we turn around and say, in order to be a volunteer in our organisation, you have to be clean 6 months? Bullshit. That's bullshit, right? The best people who do these projects are people who use drugs. And to go back to Richard again about people's motivation, right? Well, there's your motivation there. You send these guys out into the community with messages about hope and getting well and heroin-assisted treatment. You create pathways into treatment support using the lived experience of people who use drugs. We are experts by experience. We've already got the qualification. Don't worry about it. We've got street degrees, right? We've already served 10 years of an education that you don't want. Naloxone man's even sneaked in there. So, last slide. So in my darkest days, I never believed I would have had a life like I have now. Never believed it. When you give us access to treatment options like heroin assisted treatment and show us that you care, we do recover. We really don't want to die, you know. Right? When we inject heroin, we're not choosing to die that day, but tragically 15 people will today. That doesn't need to happen. Let's stop making life harder for people who use drugs. Let's just show them we love them, not just in our words, but in our actions. If money is the issue, then heroin-assisted treatment is a no-brainer. We spend £50,000 annually sending one person to prison. It's only £12,000 a year, I believe, for heroin-assisted treatment. If we can have heroin-assisted treatment in England and Scotland, it's definitely time for Wales, isn't it? We've got the template. We've already got it. We just need the area planning boards, the police and crime commissioner, and the government to get on board and say, you know what, we're not going to make this tough. We're going to make it really, really easy, because it doesn't need to be tough. All the groundwork's already been done for you. And seeing the journeys of the clients here in Middlesbrough who are on this programme, I see them like a couple of times a week, and it's a pleasure to see them grow. That I seen a couple of weeks ago, one of the girls come out in tears, and she was crying tears of joy. I said, "What's the matter with you, you nugget? Why are you crying like that?" She said, "You know what? Bought me first ever settee out of your own money." Like last week, her and her partner were telling me they've already got their Christmas shopping done. The flat's looking beautiful. Like, this is what happens when we support, not punish. So please be the change that you want to see. And I guess for me, finally, harm reduction is an act of radical love.
Naloxone man loves you.
Naloxone man loves you. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
George, that was absolutely fantastic. I have to say, it's a real shame that we're not all together in Llandudno as we would have hoped, because I'm pretty confident you'd be listening to a huge round of applause and probably a standing ovation right now, because that was incredible. And thank you, I'm sure, on behalf of everybody who had the privilege, and it was the privilege of listening to that, for your bravery and being so honest and frank in sharing your personal experience. It's outstanding. Thank you so much. We move into the Q&A session now shortly, just before we take a break, and we have got a few questions already submitted, along with numerous people just passing on their thanks to you as well, George, for that presentation, as I say. So there are some questions for you as well, George, if I may, and we have some for the PCC as well. So the first question, George, is for you, and it actually comes from Liz Saville-Roberts, who's a Member of Parliament here in North Wales, and it goes back to that example you used of somebody turning up 10 minutes late for an appointment and their lack of supposed motivation. So Liz asked the question: we need to counter the pernicious arguments of self-responsibility. What's the one strongest message we should take from you on how we actually do this?
Well, Stephen, just can you reframe the question just in a different way for us? So is it about saying, what's the one thing? Yeah,
so this argument of self-responsibility the service users need to take. So as you said, so your example of turning up on time for appointments. How can we actually turn that around to recognise the lengths that some people do actually go to, even if they are 10 minutes late? What's the one strongest message that we should take from you on how we, as agencies working in this area, how can we do that effectively?
I think for me, like honestly, for me, I think we need to examine like who we are individually within our roles in the organisations that we work in. So like I've worked in drug and alcohol treatment support for the last 20 years in one capacity or another, and I'm more mad for it now than I've ever been. Like the day that this becomes normalised for me, and that I stop seeing the humanity of the people that I work with, is the day that I need to change jobs. This needs to be vocational, right? And if you look in the whites of people's eyes who use drugs, they're the same as ours. So like the idea that like we need a trauma-informed workforce, police is all over this now, do you know what I mean? Like we need to probably ask ourselves that like at an executive level within our organisations, are all of our staff trauma-informed, or are we still seeing like the drug use as the problem? Because I think like when we get into the ability to connect with people's hearts, somebody turning up 10 minutes late, it isn't the end of the world. Do you know what I mean? It might mess our diaries around a little bit, but so what, man? Why do we need to punish people further who are already vulnerable and sick?
Absolutely. Thanks, George. Thank you for that. You can have a bit of a break now, George, because the next question is for Arfon. So, PCC, how do you envisage heroin assisted treatment rooms working in North Wales, with the geographic challenges across North Wales and reaching small pockets of users in rural communities that don't reside in main towns within each county?
Thanks for that, Leon, and thank you for joining us. It's good to hear from you. As we all know, it is difficult to provide services across North Wales, but I'm sure when Professor Sir John Strang makes his presentation, he will talk about the really difficult people, that problematic injectors that the heroin assisted treatment is aimed towards. But I do take your point, and I think the initiative by the Welsh Government with the Bwrdd Dal is another option. So I think we're very reliant on clinicians like from Kaleidoscope, Dr. Fay, and Luxman to advise us how best to deliver this service if we go ahead with a pilot.
Absolutely. Yeah, Arfon. George, there's a request here. You referred to ACEs in your presentation. You may be aware there's a huge amount of work taking place in Wales around ACEs, and Laura Tranter from the ACE Support Hub is really keen to speak to you to pick your brains about this and share the current plans around trauma-informed substance misuse training package that they're working on. So with your permission, George, we'll share your contact details with Laura, if that's okay.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Great work, Laura. Great work.
And then a question for you, George, from Stacey. If your father hadn't asked you to stop, do you think you still would have made that decision to change? A lot of substance users don't have that family intervention. What advice would you give to those who don't have immediate family or loved ones? Well, firstly, I think we need to move away from this idea that people need to stop taking drugs. That's the first thing that we need to do. So it's okay for people to get hammered on a weekend on alcohol, which kills loads and loads of people, but actually people who want an alternative, we're going to criminalize them. So we need to get away from this idea that that success is defined by abstinence, right? So like abstinence-based recovery has its place, absolutely. But also it's the harm prevention model absolutely caters for everything. So whether I had a dad or I didn't have a dad who was pushing me in that right direction. If when we're looking at things like heroin assisted treatment as a second line intervention where we've exhausted like opportunities around OST and that hasn't worked for a person, why keep making it difficult? Why don't we give them access to a clean pharmaceutical grade alternative where they can come and use drugs in a safe environment, not die and buy their own sofas and get Christmas presents even before me? Do you know what I mean? Like this, forget about it, man. Forget about, like, abstinence has to be a goal, but there's a continuum of what success looks like. And for some people, you know, very quickly, Stephen, right? What we know is that like drug use doesn't imply drug addiction, right? And for some people, taking drugs is a lifestyle choice. You know, some people who use like psychedelics or they use MDMA or they go partying and all the rest of it, right? 90% of people who use drugs like that do so without any significant health harms for themselves. But then there's a 10% of the population who wanted to become problem drug people who use drugs in a problematic way, right? And for those people, we need to do everything that we can to try and keep them alive, reduce the harms, create options and access into treatment services which say we're here, and when you're ready, we're here to help you. And if abstinence is your goal, that's fine. But if you do want to get abstinent, that's fine as well. We're not going to punish you for taking drugs. Absolutely, absolutely. There was a very similar question as well from Dr. Rachel Parsonage asked on the Q&A function as well, but I think you've addressed that one. I am conscious of time, so not a question, George, but just to say we have got the Chief Constable of North Wales Police on with us this morning as well, who has wanted to thank you for your incredibly powerful input. Makes us all think, and truly grateful for your honesty and openness, George. And we need to consider how do we create the appetite to try different approaches and not be afraid to fail, which I think is really important. So that comes from the Chief Constable in North Wales Police, and obviously you've got the PCC from North Wales on side. So we'll close it there, George, with once again, thank you so much for your really frank and honest presentation. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. We will take a short comfort break now, everybody. If we can reconvene at 11:15, please. Thank you very much.
Hi, John. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that's fine.
Are you okay to? The attendees will be able to hear us, but it's just if you wanted to have a quick practice with your presentation,
Yeah.
welcome to.
I think I'm just about to share it to check that the sharing works.
Yes, that's come up onto the screen.
Good. And if I go into it as display, you've got a thank you at the very end.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that's the one. Brilliant.
Okay, and as I've now moved back to one that's got some orange text about rolling out.
Yes, yep, that's the one.
Good, that's super. So I've got a frighteningly large number, I'm afraid, but I'm just going to whiz through them. Some of them are just like 10-second titles. So
that's absolutely fine. We're looking forward to it, John.
Okay, I shall go and top up my coffee. And
brilliant. Okay.
I'm in earshot. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Okay, thank you everybody. Hopefully you're all back with us. It is strange, this, I have to say, because obviously I'm speaking, but I'm not sure if anybody's actually there listening to me or not. But we'll carry on regardless. And really delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Professor Sir John Strang. Sir John, thank you very much for making the time to join us this morning, and really looking forward to hearing your presentation. So the virtual floor is yours, Sir John. Oh, you're still on mute, Sir John. If you can take yourself off mute, please. There we go.
Start with the important business. So Bore da. I shall move into English for the rest of my talk, if that's okay. We've got a lot to cover. I wanted to talk about two different aspects, which I know that you've been looking at and implementing in North Wales. And I'm disappointed not to be on a nice long weekend up in North Wales, but sitting in my study instead. So I'll spend the first half of my talk talking about the importance of take-home naloxone, which I know you've been rolling out already, and then the second half talking about supervised heroin treatment. This just describes, we have a large amount of slides to cover, so I'm just going to move very quickly through them. Different NHS and trying to work with industry and new treatments. Also to remind myself and everybody else that the work we do is always collaborative. It involves working with colleagues, commissioners, drug user advocacy groups, or individuals that I've worked with specifically. And I think one of the groups often overlooked is families and those addressing problems around overdose deaths. For those of you that I don't know, I head up the National Addiction Centre, which is a sort of collective of leading researchers and clinicians looking at how can we push for advances in both understanding and treatment across drugs, alcohol and tobacco, looking at research in a number of different domains. And probably the bottom of the horizontal ones about science to innovation is probably where a lot of my interest and work is. What can we do to bring science to help develop new treatments? So the group I head up were looking at researches into understanding substance use behavior, pilot development and testing of types of intervention, and then looking for policy analysis and whether we can put input to develop more public good. So I head up the addictions department at King's College London, and for those doing sort of further training in addictions, we actually run two different master's courses, a taught master's and some international distance learning masters. A lot of what I covers is within a book which those of you around commissioning and policy as well as practice, it was a dozen of us as scientists from around the world looking at what did we think science could tell us about how one should form drug policy for the public good. And for those of you who are members of the Society of the Study of Addiction, I think you're able to get a free copy of the book through the Society. And talk about heroin treatment, and they're almost they're at opposite ends of how one would think about planning of one's services. So if we think of the treatment needs that there are quite often in healthcare, we look at a pyramid of healthcare need. One might do this with heart disease or kidney problems or mental health problems or addiction problems. There would be broad-based interventions that you would expect to be widely applied. You'd then have more specialist interventions at the intermediate level, but where you'd still expect them to be within the scope of all practitioners or most practitioners. And then you'd have some specialist treatments for the much more challenging cases from a medical perspective. So if we think of it from a heart disease point of view, one would look at preventive heart disease at the bottom level. The middle level would be treatment of people with some degree of heart disease or hypertension. But at the very top, you'd be looking at things like heart surgery. So that would just be to illustrate it. But we also need to realize there are hard to reach populations and critical to treat populations, which we've put as slabs on the side. Now, take-home naloxone, which I'll be talking about for the next few minutes, is very much at the bottom level here, that the concept of take-home naloxone is that ideally every household in the world would have take-home naloxone in it. Every magazine we buy would have instructions about what every citizen should know about emergency resuscitation. It's a broad-based public health intervention, whereas the supervised heroin treatment would be very much the top of that top bit of the pyramid there, where we're looking at, could one contemplate the equivalent of an intensive care ward or a special care baby unit, some treatment intervention that's extreme and challenging to deliver, maybe expensive to deliver, but it's the only way in which we can bring about helping someone achieve benefit that they can't otherwise. Explains the relationship between the two sections I'm talking about. I just wanted to draw your attention. I had the opportunity of working with Nora Volkoff, who's globally the leading scientist in the addictions field. She heads up the National Institute on Drug Abuse in the States. And we co-led what's called a disease primer for the journal. And the slides I'll leave available with the conference organizers if people are wanting to look at the detail. So give you how to find it. But within this, we put together a flow diagram. And again, we'd be looking, so this would be looking at whether someone had mild or major heroin addiction problems or substance use problems, and then the different interventions that one would be considering. And the take-home naloxone concept would be a wash over the entirety of this flow diagram, whereas the supervised heroin treatment would be one any leverage. Okay. In take-home naloxone at community level. Why is this important? Well, it's because both nationally, so nationally, whether it's Wales or the UK, or whether one's looking at globally, there's a massive burden as a result of opioid overdose deaths. These are figures from the US which illustrate the different versions of the opioid overdose problem. So here we have deaths in the US in this graph over the last 15 to 20 years, where we can see there's been a 3 to 4-fold increase in the number of deaths from prescription opiate drugs. And then on the right-hand side here, we can see the much more rapid, more recent increase in heroin overdose deaths. And so we've got sort of two overlapping epidemics of drug-related deaths associated with opioids, so heroin and heroin-like drugs. And in the last few years, with huge surge in illicit America. By and large, we don't have a problem in Europe, or certainly not in across the UK. No, certainly not. In the UK, it attracts a lot of attention in the US, but in the UK, it only gets a small amount of political or media attention. And this is not appropriate when you look at the burden to society. So we can, these are actually data from the US again, but UK data are broadly similar. I've managed to retrieve the data, but I haven't yet drawn the graph, I'm afraid. But UK data also show the fact that opioid overdose deaths now are significantly greater than road traffic accident deaths. And yet the public attention to that, or the political attention, doesn't reflect that change. One of the important ways in which we can reduce drug-related deaths before we get to naloxone itself is by improving the quality of the treatment provided, and the way in which we provide it, both the reach we have and the quality of what we deliver have a significant influence on whether we manage to prevent deaths. And I was listening to the points that Tracey was making at the beginning of the conference, and these are hugely important, that we pay attention not only to the amount of delivery of what we provide, but the quality of the delivery provided. The Orange guidelines, which came from the health departments of all 4 of the countries in the UK, these are very much a sort of workshop manual for clinicians and for commissioners, looking at how to improve the quality as well as the spread, as well as the reach of treatment. This is important because if we look at, we can take some concrete measures of how well are we delivering treatment. These were from a survey quite a long time ago now, but they illustrate the point. These were the doses being prescribed, and what we see here, so here's the doses, what proportion of methadone prescriptions which were in which dose bands. And for those of you not familiar with dose ranges, the most effective doses at helping people quit heroin use and improve their circumstances are 60 milligrams and above. So from the middle of that graph to the right, we find that nationally across England and Wales, virtually none of those prescriptions were in the most effective zone. They were almost all in the sub-therapeutic zone. So you have to start asking yourself questions about why are we providing poor quality treatment, and then wondering why it doesn't work as well as we'd like it to work. I'll leave this for people to look at if they want to look back at the slides, but there's within science, Cochrane reviews are major systematic reviews. And in the UK, NICE would look at these as well. And here we can see both with the extent to which people get opioid abstinence. This major review looked at high dose versus medium dose versus low dose maintenance treatment. And essentially all of the benefits are substantially greater with high dose versus medium dose, with the worst benefit, the least benefit being achieved with low dose prescribing, including the mortality rate. So the overdose mortality rate, being in treatment is protective, being in low dose treatment is less protective. I'll skip those two. When we start looking at deaths, we not only do we know that opiate users are particularly at risk, but we know that there are points in time in their contact with treatment services or other institutions where there's a particular concentration of deaths. So when people finish detox or come out of rehab, early stages of methadone treatment, but in particular on release from prison, there's a major concentration. There's a large number of deaths in that immediate post-release period. So I'm just going to spend the next couple of slides looking at this concentration. And this is operationally important for commissioners and clinicians. It means not only do we know that the individuals in general are at risk, but we know that there are specific weeks or months when they are at risk. So there's a paper by my colleagues, Michael Farrell and John Marsden, where I'm going to explain this graph to you. If we look at the right-hand side of this figure, here's what mortality ratio within the and the excess mortality ratio compared to maroon color, basically meaning that it's drug-related reasons why they have excess mortality. So half the deaths are drug-related. The curve. You then I think I probably lost the screen with you. Let me just. But I'm hoping I'm back with you now. And we can see there's a 40-fold increased mortality rate in that first week after people come out of prison. And that's almost entirely related to drug-related overdose deaths. Either Arfon or Helen or Stephen, if one of you could perhaps just switch your voice on and confirm that I'm now back in contact with you, that would
yes,
be
we can see the presentation now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay.
I seem not to be able to move on. Oh yeah, okay. So the very simple concept that we developed is that is really one of technology transfer. In medicine, there are lots of things we develop originally in hospitals. So how to treat severe allergies, and then realizing that one should place the adrenaline with the individual or the family where someone has an allergy, and then seeing that one should develop that into the EpiPen, or realizing we can defibrillate people who are about to die from heart disease and ventricular fibrillation, and then realizing that ambulances could have portable defibrillators, and then realizing that we could place them in leisure centers or shopping centers. These are all technology transfer, and our equivalent of technology transfer is taking the simple concept that with naloxone, we have this complete heroin or opioid reverser, which can fairly miraculously reverse an overdose within a matter of a few minutes after having been injected. And I'll come on to the route of use. So it's a very simple public health concept, but by and large, we've been very slow and weak in its implementation. So it's now 25 years since we first realized that this warranted serious consideration, and that we should be looking both to drug users themselves, their friendship networks, their families, and any agency working with these individuals, that they should know how to manage an overdose, and be given the ability to intervene appropriately. We then started working with studying the acceptability and the feasibility of this with drug user populations in treatment and out of treatment. Very positive and encouraging. We began the first few pilot schemes, and very quickly we're getting reports of overdoses successfully reversed. It to realize another important intervention workforce considered properly in who should manage an overdose and who should be both in England. We worked with the National Treatment Agency to develop a training program for families and carers. A hugely important step in 2012 was when Scotland incorporated that into their national programme. And I think I've got my dates correctly. I think it was later in the same year that Wales did likewise. And Scotland and Wales became the first two countries in the world where take-home naloxone became part of what comprehensive treatment should include. A couple of years later, World Health Organization then released guidelines globally, broadly followed what Scotland and Wales had already developed. My last couple of slides about naloxone. From the early work we were doing, it became clear that from a public and a political point of view, there was a problem that it was an injectable drug that we were talking about making much more widely available, particularly because the population that we were talking about giving this to was a population who injected drugs, many of whom injected drugs. I mean, the reality is it's the last drug in the world that a drug user would ever want to inject. I mean, it has no abuse liability and provokes withdrawal symptoms, but it made the conversations very difficult with politicians, the public, the police, and we began exploring whether it was possible to develop a concentrated naloxone nasal spray. So it needed to be about 20 to 40 times more concentrated as a solution, so that the fine spray of a nasal spray would have enough naloxone in it to be effective. We became actively involved in looking at, could one get enough naloxone across the membrane into the bloodstream from a nasal spray, and we worked with industry to develop what's now across Europe is the Nixoid nasal spray. There's now 4 different nasal sprays around the world, produced by different companies, all with a very similar concept. And a monograph about naloxone. You're also able to ask EMCDDA to send you a hard copy version, which I'm sort of still fairly traditional myself and regard that as much more attractive as a way of reading it. And this covers most of the areas around take-home naloxone. Okay, moving on to supervised heroin treatment, and I hope this is slightly shorter. Let's be clear what it is and what it isn't, and apologies if I'm saying things that are obvious to everyone in the audience, but there are two concepts in the public and professional debate. One is around supervised heroin treatment, which is a treatment which is high intensity for a small number of people, usually the most damaged from a population in need, where the ordinary approaches to treatment don't seem to have had any traction. And then there's a different approach of medically supervised injecting centres or facilities, which are essentially publicly available. They're a public health perspective, which basically says if people are going to use drugs, whatever drugs they're using, it would be safer for them to be in a safe place. And it isn't particularly trying to get them into treatment. It isn't an intensive intervention for them. It just says it'd be safer if they were in a safe place, not in a park or in a street corner. So they're two very different concepts, but they frequently get confused. So firstly, to remind ourselves that the UK's historically got a long history of injectable maintenance treatment, including heroin prescribing. My own view is it doesn't have much relevance to the current debate about heroin-assisted treatment, in that it was quite a loose treatment that wasn't particularly carefully monitored. And it was by and large, for most of the century for which we did it, was for a population of older patients who were quite often stable people who'd been exposed to opiates in the course of treatment, become dependent in that way. So they weren't from a drug user community, and they didn't fit the stereotype that we have today of drug users. It largely almost completely disappeared by the end of the 1900s. By the late 90s, there was hardly any of this historical heroin prescribing. So the current debate about the intense treatment within supervised heroin treatment is, in my view, is a different discussion. So we were involved with a randomized trial looking at supervised heroin treatment, which I'll just take you quickly through how it worked. So just to remind you, this is the top of the pyramid. This is the most difficult of patients, where all of the things that we tried seem to have no leverage. And if we wanted a sort of flow diagram of what happens, we would still taking the treatment-seeking heroin user who'd become dependent, we'd be looking at good quality opiate substitution treatment. And if that repeatedly failed, we ought to sort of put somebody into what I've called here an optimization box. We ought to sort of say, we need to look at other things we can do to get the treatment to work better. It's what we'd do if we had somebody that we were treating for their epilepsy or their hypertension, or their kidney problems, where the ordinary treatment didn't seem to work. We'd make sure we had everything as well adjusted as possible. But if we still fail, despite all of what we do, then we might look at an enhanced treatment like supervised heroin treatment for a brief trial period to see, do we see real benefit from this more intensive, more expensive intervention? And yeah, I'll skip through my point. The Swiss particularly led on this, and so if I'd had time, I was going to make some joke about we had a rusty penknife for this treatment from earlier in the UK, and the Swiss took it away and converted it into a gleaming sort of multi-skilled Swiss Army knife. The UK government became interested in this from the early 2000s, and we decided that we really needed a good science answer to whether this could turn things around for a group where it appeared treatment couldn't help them at all. we needed to know, did it work, and if so, how? So the characteristics of the new clinics: they're open every day of the week. All doses are taken under supervision. There are no takeaway injections. Because it's all supervised, as a clinician, you could feel much more comfortable about letting somebody have a dose which was appropriate to their needs, whereas most of the experience of working, if you were not supervising it, is your caution makes you want to keep doses as low as possible. Whereas if it's under supervision, at least you know there's no diversion that's going on. And we had a very flexible way of working with people. So within these strict rules, there would be occasions when somebody might not be able to come in twice a day or 3 times a day, depending how often the supervised heroin clinic had been set up to be open. And we would convert somebody to oral for a day or a session when they couldn't come in. I've got a quick few photos, and I imagine Danny will take us through more of this in his presentation, so I won't dwell on these, but there's very little of a specialist nature. We'd create an area where somebody could inject, where we could observe what was going on, but there was a degree of respectful privacy. The nurse would draw up the medicine, so it was a deliberately medicalized feel to it. The heroin, we often get asked, do we go out and buy it on the street? No. Heroin is diamorphine hydrochloride. It's a pharmaceutical medicine. It's 100% pure. It's no different from any other opiate medicine in terms of how we prescribe it and obtain it. The patient would then self-administer, keep the patient with us for the next 15 minutes or so to check that they were safe to be going back out home or wherever they were going. Because we were doing this as a research study, so again, reminding ourselves, we're looking at an entrenched population who fail with other treatments. So we're deliberately looking at this with people where ordinary treatment hasn't had any traction. And so this population coming in, we're injecting heroin. For the randomized trial that we were doing, we took just under 130 people in this category. We had 3 clinics across different parts of England, and they were randomized. They would either receive the supervised heroin treatment or a similar treatment with supervised injectable methadone, or they would get the best we could do with oral methadone. And so we were wanting to see with that group, could we get an improvement that we weren't seeing with the improved methadone treatment? We had a whole load of measures that different people came up with different views on what was the most important outcome to be measuring. But in our view, it was the actual reduction in their street heroin use that these other benefits were consequent upon the quitting of the street heroin use. So we ended up focusing on the reduction in street heroin use as the important primary outcome measure, as a result of which those other important measures. There was about this, so different government departments or different groups would want to say, oh, well, it should be reduced criminal behaviour. But the point we came back to is we're only seeing the reduced criminal behaviour because of the reduced street heroin use. So our primary outcome should still be the street heroin use. However, from point of view, we were able to look at whether there had been complete abstinence from street heroin use or a major reduction. And given the severity of this population's heroin use, where typically they've been using heroin for about 15 years, we saw a major reduction as what we were mainly focusing on, but we would report on both, whether people became completely abstinent. And we measured this with random urine tests. For people wanting to look at the detail, we had a paper in the Lancet in 2010 reporting on the results from the trial, where there's a lot of detail describing the proportion who were giving a negative urine to street heroin from different ways of analysing the data. I'm going to take you through these in slightly different ways, but for those of you just wanting to know what did we find, essentially we found the strongest achievements were in the supervised injectable heroin group. The supervised injectable methadone group showed some improvement, but it was not a great deal better than the optimized oral methadone group, making oral methadone better. That benefit within a matter of a month or so. So knows what and significantly reduced their heroin use, and what proportion achieved complete abstinence from street heroin. So let's do it in a sort of a traffic light system. So when people came into the trial, these are our three groups. So they're all the same. They're randomized into either getting supervised heroin on the, let me just check, supervised heroin treatment is on the far right, supervised injectable methadone, so I've lost the legend here, so supervised injectable methadone in the middle, and oral methadone on the far left. And all of them are using heroin regularly when they enter treatment, as you'd expect. When we studied them at 6 months within the treatment and looked at who had responded, who had largely quit their street heroin use, we actually found that about a quarter of the people in the oral methadone group and the injectable methadone group had largely quit their street heroin use. But the biggest improvement was in the group in the supervised injectable heroin group. So the ones who were being given prescribed injectable heroin had quit their street heroin use, which had been the objective. This was, we did weekly random urine tests but, over a 3-month period, months 4 to 6. So we had, if I remember correctly, 13 urine tests per person. Now, because as a clinician, I'd also want to know, so how many people complete where their urine tests for more than half of the occasions were now negative. But I'd also want to know how many of these people had completely quit. How many people had urines which were entirely negative. And it's only in the supervised injectable heroin group that we've got a fifth of them, so 19% of them, where all of the urine specimens for them were negative for street heroin. They obviously had the prescribed heroin, but they had completely quit. And then there's another 50% where they've significantly reduced it, but are still turning in occasional positive urines. And then there's a quarter where we appeared to have had very little benefit influence. Now, the group at the bottom, the 19%, these are people where every urine that they gave, that we collected randomly from them, was negative for the street heroin. And I'd want to know, well, what about people who almost achieved that, who got, for example, 12 out of 13 were negative. So if we look at that, we discover that it's nearly 40% only had one urine that was positive. And if I was a real soft touch and I said, well, look, I'll even be impressed if you got two, gone away. You discover that there's nearly 60% where the vast majority of their urines are negative. So the last key point I wanted to draw your attention to is how quickly these changes occurred. So this these graphs are the data for the 3 groups that have been randomized. So they were all identical people when they started. The groups were identical when they started. And this looks at what proportion of the urines from these groups were negative for street heroin. And you can see there's a slow improvement, a gradual improvement over the 6 months that's in this graph as we move across through time. There is a gradual improvement with people beginning to turn in urines that were negative for street heroin. But the only group that's significantly different is that blue line, which is the supervised injectable heroin group, who within a month, you've got more than half of the urines being collected, which are negative for the street heroin. So it appeared genuinely to be making a difference for this group, and that difference was seen very quickly. For serious nerds wanting to look at the sort of details of the cost effectiveness analysis, we have a paper led by excellent health economist professor who I've worked with, Professor Sarah Byford. I'm not going to take you through this, but there's details about the significant cost effectiveness benefit of the supervised injectable treatments. I think I'm going to stop at that point because I've overrun, apart from to say if you're wanting more details on it, again, EMCDDA were kind enough to support us to produce a monograph on this area of work as well. And this is also available for download from EMCDDA, or you can give them your address and ask them to send you a hard copy version of the short book describing supervised heroin treatment in the UK and in countries across Europe. Well thought. So we need to remember that we're addressing the needs of a disadvantaged group. We need to be advocates as well as clinicians and commissioners. There are our sons and daughters, there are brothers and sisters. We have a shameful willingness to accept substandard interventions, and we should challenge that and correct that. And some of the poor results we see from treatment are the results of poor treatment that's being delivered. We need to be open-minded to the fact there might be new interventions, new treatments. We shouldn't accept them uncritically. We need to ask questions and to monitor whether the claimed benefits really do occur. And we need to value impact. We need to consider that our commissioning of services is in every sense an investment, but we don't want to just go around buying cheap treatment. What we want is good value. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir John. You did overrun, but it was absolutely fascinating. So there was absolutely no way that I was going to interrupt you, I have to say, because it was fascinating. As you can imagine, it has prompted quite a few questions as well. But with your agreement, Sir John, what I'd like to do is hear from Danny, Ahmed first, and then if we move into the Q&A session thereafter. So if you're okay to stay with us, Sir John.
Yeah, no, that's it. That seems very sensible because I imagine our presentations will overlap.
I would think so. So thank you very much for that, Sir John. If I can then finally introduce Daniel Ahmed, who will speak about his experience in Cleveland. And as I say, I'm sure that will prompt further questions as well. We'll then move into the final Q&A session. So thank you, Sir John, and over to you, Danny.
Thank you. I'll just try and share my screen.
So John, if you could now stop sharing your screen, and then that should allow Danny to be able to share his, I believe. Thank you.
Can I confirm that you can see that and you can hear me?
We can indeed. Thanks, Danny.
Brilliant. Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. I have to say it's the first time I've taking part in a conference wearing my slippers, but there's a first time for everything. I'm Danny Ahmed. I'm one of the clinical partners at Foundations. We are a specialist GP practice, which I'll tell you a little bit more about in a moment. I'm a registered mental health nurse prescriber and an integrative psychotherapist. So a little bit about Foundations. So we're a specialist GP practice. We're based in Middlesbrough. We support patients who are struggling with substance use issues in Middlesbrough and more recently in the Hartlepool area. We also provide services for patients who are seeking asylum, the homeless, and we have a small street medicine pilot. And we also provide GP services for people who've been excluded from primary care services due to violent or aggressive behaviour. But today it's heroin assisted treatment that I'm going to talk to you about. And one of the big questions that I often get asked is why now and why Middlesbrough? So the next couple of slides will just kind of clarify some of that. And George has mentioned some of this already. Middlesbrough is one of the local authorities with the most deprived areas in England. So nearly half of the boroughs of Middlesbrough fall into the most deprived category within the UK, within England, sorry. If you combine that with the rates of heroin use in Middlesbrough, they are also significantly higher than the rest of England. And Middlesbrough basically has the highest rate of heroin users per head of population in England. When we combine that with the fact that, unfortunately, Middlesbrough consistently continues to report high drug-related death figures, we end up with a real toxic mix of deprivation, high levels of heroin users, and high levels of drug-related deaths. So we started to explore how could we tackle some of the issues that we were facing in Middlesbrough. And in 2017, we explored the evidence-based options that were available, primarily looking at the introduction of heroin-assisted treatment, but also looking at drug consumption rooms or supervised facilities. And like everyone who's on the conference today, I do doff my cap to Peter for the work he's doing in Glasgow with the mobile DCR. So for Middlesbrough, we had a number of challenges and a lot of work to do. The way we set about starting heroin-assisted treatment was conducting some field visits to really understand the practical implications of running a heroin-assisted treatment program, the day-to-day issues that brought, the combining the evidence that we'd read about with some practical experience. So I was fortunate enough to visit Crosstown Clinic in Canada, whereby they had been running a heroin-assisted treatment program for a number of years and were working with up to 200 people a day. So it gave me a real opportunity to see a high turnover clinic that was having an impact in the Vancouver area. I also had the opportunity to visit clinics in Holland and Switzerland, and again, pick up on that practical experience. Critically, those field visits also allowed us to make connections with the manufacturers of Diafin, which is the medication we use within our program. The Diafin is critical to our program because it's a licensed product across Europe and regularly used in heroin-assisted treatment. And it did enable us to make HAT viable and to significantly reduce costs. For people who aren't aware, diamorphine in the UK can be unstable as a market and can be expensive. So for us, it was of real benefit to be able to use Diafin. We also then had to look at acquiring the appropriate legal licenses to run a heroin-assisted treatment program. And those were twofold. We needed to acquire licenses for our doctors who would prescribe diamorphine, and we needed to acquire licenses for our premises so that we could hold controlled drugs on site. And both of those processes took a little bit of time. And as you can appreciate, we needed to assure the Home Office and Public Health England that we had the right processes in place to provide the treatment safely and to look after controlled drugs. Our next significant challenge was one of funding, and I imagine that this is one that creates a significant barrier across England in terms of moving forward with heroin assisted treatment. We very much took a partnership approach. We worked with the public health team locally, and we connected with the local PCC, and they were a real driving force in bringing together a partnership to fund what was an initial one-year pilot. A key player, as I mentioned, was Barry Coppinger, who was the then Police and Crime Commissioner, and he brought together funding from the PCC, from probation, from Tees and Weir Prison Group, and from the public health team, which enabled us to then provide heroin-assisted treatment to 15 individuals. Another element that we had to consider was how we engaged with the media and the public around implementing heroin-assisted treatment and ensuring that they understood what we were aiming to do, and that some of the controversy that can be surround such programs was as well managed as possible. What was really interesting with some of the media comments was there was a real broad church of feedback from the public. We had some really difficult, vile comments that came back about, you know, picking up on some of the comments that George had mentioned earlier, that encouraged us to, you know, provide lethal doses of diamorphine to ensure that people, you know, died in part of these programs. That providing such a service was not in the public interest. We also got really positive comments of people who could see that we were attempting to try and stabilize some of the issues in Middlesbrough and provide a treatment option that really helped some individuals, which in benefit would help the community. I think the one comment that personally really tickled my heart was the fact that somebody texted in one of the local papers and said, "Why is Pep Guardiola running a heroin-assisted treatment program?" And as an avid football fan, I'm quite happy to be linked with Pep. But what we were trying to achieve, well, similar to as Sir John has mentioned, we kind of focused primarily on the cessation of street heroin use, and that would then allow the other benefits to fall out. But primarily we were looking at that reduction of street heroin use, but we wanted to engage patients into treatment as a platform for restarting their recovery journey, stop injecting, stop other problem drug use, help them to improve their health and quality of life, break that cycle of criminal behaviour, which in turn impacted some of the social issues that we knew some of the patients were struggling from, and actually, when stable and able, start to access education and employment opportunities. In terms of patient selection, again, as Sir John mentioned, we were looking at a particular cohort of individuals, those that we knew the traditional treatment offer had, they'd basically failed to benefit from. And we did that by exploring with partner agencies their individuals who were effectively overheating their systems or not benefiting from the offer that was provided. So we engaged with probation and with the police, looking at who were some of the high risk crime causes within the local area. We worked with our MRT, so Middlesbrough Recovering Together colleagues, to look at those that were failing to benefit from the treatment offer, as I've mentioned. But we were also able to access primary and secondary care data to understand those that were frequently attending A&E for perhaps overdoses or for emergency health care. When we started to collate the information from all of our partners, we saw that they were very similar individuals who were effectively being impacted across the whole system. We knew that they had to have that chronic injecting heroin dependence, and we created a kind of partnership board really, where we discussed individual cases and made decisions about who we were going to make the treatment offer to. So we went live just over a year ago, in 15th of October 2019. So we've spent over 12 months operating now, and you can see some of the pictures there of our injecting area. I'm going to come on to a little walkthrough video in a moment that you'll be able to see in a little bit more detail. And again, picking up on Sir John's points, we were individuals attend the clinic 7 days a week for twice daily supervised doses of diamorphine. And critically, we provided with our MRT colleagues wraparound support. So each individual accessed a care coordinator, had access to mutual aid opportunities, and to liaise with peers who were further in their recovery journeys. So I'm just going to take you through this video, which should hopefully work.
I've become aware over a number of years of the damage that heroin is doing to our society in Cleveland. I want to do something to tackle that problem because I want to see a better deal, not only for the people who are addicted to heroin, whose lives are at risk, but for our wider communities, for the businesses, for residents, and for all the agencies and organisations that work here.
Previous trials using heroin-assisted treatment or injectable opioid treatment have been very clinical in their approach. We've got a real recovery focus, so we're able to work with partner agencies when patients are stabilised to start to address the other issues that may be happening in their lives. Patients will be assessed for suitability to take the medication and then brought down to the injecting room. To reduce the risk of diversion, there will be no coats or bags brought into the injecting room, so patients can store personal belongings within one of the lockers that we have here. Once they've stored the belongings, they'll take a seat at one of the booths where they will be prepared for the self-administration of the medication. In preparation to self-administer the diamorphine, patients will receive a kidney bowl with a range of once-use only equipment. They would have alcohol swabs to clean the area pre-injection, tourniquet to support blood flow or restrict blood flow. They would receive the syringe, which would have the diamorphine in at the correct dose. This will be labelled for the right patient. And they would have cotton buds and a plaster if required for post-injection. So once the self-administration is complete, then the needle will be disposed of in the sharps bin. So after self-administration, patients will move into the consulting rooms where they can meet with partner agencies to explore some of their social issues. So when the chaos of substance use is stabilised through the programme, patients will be supported to engage with partner agencies. They'll work with a care coordination team who will look at a comprehensive care plan for each individual. They'll get support from providers of housing. They'll get support from mental health teams. And in essence, we'll be looking at all the areas of an individual's life and starting to support them to rebuild as they work towards a meaningful recovery. I've been around the world to explore some of these treatment options and have seen the success of such programs in Switzerland and in Canada, where I've witnessed individuals really turn their lives around from being high crime causing, very poorly individuals to being recognised and welcome members of the community.
What I hope to achieve is that people will stop losing their lives, people will get their lives back on track. Our local agencies will come together and give that support that's necessary. I think our local communities and local businesses will welcome that as time progresses. But perhaps most important of all, we want the rest of the country to see the good work that's going on, particularly government departments and national agencies.
Danny, can I just jump in at that point? I think we've got a few technical issues. I assume it's the case for everybody, but I could hear the audio,
Right.
but I couldn't see the video.
Okay. Apologies. This is a Zoom newbie. I think I'll abandon the video and I'll make that available. It is available on YouTube.
That's what I was going to ask. If we can, because I'm sure colleagues would like to see the images that went along with the audio. So if you can share that with us, then we'll make sure we circulate that link to everybody on the call this morning. So we'll do that.
Yeah, I'll do that for you. So apologies for not quite getting the tech right there.
No, that's absolutely fine.
So we'll move on there then. So looking at the evaluation of our program, we have a short 6-month evaluation that is just about finished. And that's been looking at the social and environmental impacts of the HAT program over that 6-month period. We've been exploring the criminal justice system. So the individual's interaction with the criminal justice system 6 months prior and 6 months post our intervention, so being on the HAT program. We're also looking at some basic data around individuals' weight, their housing status, how they're engaging with other psychosocial interventions, their street drug use, and their general well-being. And that's due to be completed round about now by Teesside University. And we've also been linking in, and will continue to link in, with the Glasgow research around HAT and the implementation of a HAT program, as we've both got useful information to share. Moving into 21-22, Teesside University have been working incredibly hard to access some grant funding, and have managed to do that from the NIHR ARC funding stream, which is allowing them to work with Durham University and the London School of Tropical Medicine. And what they're going to really look at in the next year is the experience of individuals who have either completed HAT, discontinued from HAT, are continuing to take part in HAT, and also the stakeholders, so the staff. Effectively, they're going to start looking at what is the experience of an individual who's involved with a heroin-assisted treatment program. And I think there's some real exciting learning opportunities from how HAT has been delivered in our area, and what we can learn to ensure that we get HAT right, not just ourselves, but can share that learning so that we get the programs just right across the UK. So what follows is a series of slides exploring some of those early findings. We've had 13 clients to date that have received heroin-assisted treatment. We've currently got 8 who continue. We had 1 client who left HAT after 1 week of treatment, who felt it wasn't for them. They struggled with the structure of the program. We had 1 individual who we had to suspend treatment for because of ongoing problematic street drug use. We had 1 person who we paused treatment for due to having some significant mental health issues. And we've had now 2 clients who have committed further offences and quite rightly received custodial sentences. For the purpose of the slides moving forward, we've selected a control group of 6 clients. And that's been done because they are a group that have been consistently involved with HAT for a significant period of time. So we could have selected a group that had been in there for 38 weeks, but it'd only have a small cohort size of 1. So we picked somewhere along the middle just to give us a kind of average look at these early findings. And the data goes up to July 2020. So if we look at offending first, the next couple of slides will explore offending. What we've seen is in the first column that the total number of detected crimes for the 6 participants prior to commencing treatment in their kind of criminal history, was 541 criminal offences. What we've seen within our group is that the number of detected crimes while receiving HAT has dramatically reduced to 3. we can see the individual in the middle column, the individual costs to society of the detected crimes. So you can see they range from £58,000 to, in Hat 7, nearly £1 million of crime committed over their career, with a combined total of detected crime costs of just over 2 million. And if you look at the third column, you can see the overall sum of detected crimes and offences committed whilst receiving heroin assisted treatment has dramatically dropped to 15,700. Another way of looking at that data and that information is exploring the number of offences, per individual. So we can see that Hat 2 had committed 67 offences prior to Hat and has committed none while receiving treatment and has completed probation. We can see with Hat 5, they had committed 146 offences and committed none. And again, we're improving their compliance with probation. And we can see with Hat 7 and Hat 9 that they had committed a significant number of offences pre-Hat, but that had dramatically reduced also. So we can see that reduction in crime, but we can also see that improved engagement with some of the criminal justice agencies that just wasn't there before. A further way of looking at reoffending was exploring the average number of offences that individuals on Hat would have committed over a 6-month period. So that's not just the last 6 months before they got involved in the programme, but over every 6 months of their kind of criminal career. And you can see that the average varies. So Hat 4 would average a number of 4 offences every 6 months prior to starting Hat, and that dramatically reduced to, well, 0. So stopped offending. Hat 7 would be committing up to 6 offences every 6 months, and that's reduced to 2, so a reduction of 67%. So again, it doesn't matter which way you kind of look at these figures, you can see that incredible impact really on offending behaviour. In terms of attendance to our clinic, one of the things that we worried about when we set up the service was, would individuals who had struggled to engage with a traditional treatment offer, had often struggled to turn up for clinical appointments or psychosocial interventions, weren't engaging with external agencies, would they be able to commit to what is a huge commitment of attending the service twice a day, 7 days a week? Would they be able to come in on Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, all of those days where, you know, we often connect with other people? And I think our fears have been misplaced really, because the attendance rate has been quite superb, with a 98% attendance rate. And even through the pandemic, we were able to keep the service going, and the attendance rate didn't drop particularly. We have, with some of the participants or people who have chosen not to take part in Hat, they have fed back that their individual worry was that they wouldn't be able to commit to such an intense program. We've tried to encourage them to kind of trial doing that with us as part of experimenting really about whether they would be suitable. But it is certainly a barrier to some individuals getting on board with a heroin assisted treatment program. If we look at some of the urine testing, so similar to as Sir John was mentioning, we are regularly undertaking urine tests for the individuals. So we've tested everybody from week 1 all the way through. So every week they get a randomized urine test for street heroin. We use tests that are able to differentiate between street heroin use and the prescribed diaphin. And what you can see is a consistent reduction in heroin use. So we do have a small number of users who continue to use heroin, and primarily it's one individual who tends to use on a more regular basis than some of the other individuals. So we can see that the street heroin use has either been eliminated or dramatically reduced, all of these individuals prior to coming on to heroin assisted treatment were habitual users of heroin, so using 3, 4, 5 times every single day. So we're really pleased in terms of seeing the results of such of these tests, because we can see a dramatic reduction. We also explore with individuals their overall well-being, and we do that through the TOPS form. So treatment outcome profile, for those who are not familiar with it, is a standard outcome measure that's used in substance use services in England, I believe across the UK, but certainly in England. And what we do is we ask individuals on a scale of 0 to 20 in one part of the form, how they would rate their psychological health, their physical health, and their overall quality of life, with a low score equaling very poor to a score of 20 being a score of good. And you can see across all 3 domains, psychological, physical health, and overall quality of life, dramatic improvements in self-reporting, that they feel better. So a 329% increase in psychological well-being, 150%, 142%, sorry, in physical health, and nearly 242% increase in overall quality of life. So as well as having that impact on criminal behaviour, we can see that the individuals involved in the programme are reporting that heroin-assisted treatment is positively benefiting them in these 3 domains. We also use the top form to explore use of other substances. It's not often that you come across an individual who just uses one particular substance, and that's very true for the individuals who are involved in the heroin-assisted treatment programme. And what you can see again is that we see a dramatic reduction of individuals reporting their use of other substances. So some of the critics have had, when I've had discussions, have been that because we provide the diamorphine, that individuals will then go out, continue to commit crime, and continue to use other drugs with that money, rather than a reduction of overall drug use. This information kind of flies in the face of that, really. We can see across all the domains that there is a significant reduction in substance use across all of those areas. You note that there's an increase in tobacco use. I think that's probably a recording error in terms of how vaping has been recorded on 1 or 2 of the individuals. But again, overall, really pleasing to see those dramatic reductions in overall substance use. We also conduct the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Health Wellbeing score with individuals. So this is, again, asking individuals how they feel about the following headings, and they can answer with one of the following responses that you can see underneath. And this is done on a monthly basis when we touch base with the individuals. And again, what you can see is that there is a significant change in people's perception of their mental well-being. So an 85% increase in scores after 1 month, and then a change of 72% in total scores in over the 7-month period. Largest changes seem to be around feeling more connected to other people, and going back to George's presentation, that's a real benefit to us, that people are starting to feel more connected with their families, more connected with their communities, and more connected with the services that are there to support them. An increase in feeling more useful, again, a really useful parameter in people feeling that they have something to give, they have something to offer, that their lives are not just blighted by the continual cycle of chaotic substance use. A more moderate increase was around the area of whether people were able to make their own mind up about things. And as you would expect, we saw a decrease in the total scores between months 5 and 7, which probably does reflect how we probably were all feeling during the COVID lockdown and quarantine period, and perhaps we're all going to see that downturn in our mental well-being as we move into another lockdown. And just to finish, really, exploring some feedback that we've had from the community. So a healthcare professional came back to us and said the physical appearance in the clients has dramatically improved. They're putting on weight and they look generally better. A community worker has fed back about one individual saying that all of my volunteers were so stressed with his behaviour through his drug use. Now he's a changed man, full of hugs and love. It's amazing to see him now, so caring from being very badly behaved, and he's been housed as part of the programme. And then a police officer took the time to contact us to say that he'd known a particular HAT participant for the last 15 years, and that in that time he'd seen them addicted to drugs and involved in criminal behaviour this entire period, and that they looked the best that they'd ever seen. They weren't suspected or wanted for any crimes, and they were talking positively about the future, and they couldn't believe the difference and how pleased they were for them. And I'll end on this final slide, which I hope will work because it's more media. And this is James and then Julie, who are both participants in the programme. And they're just giving some of their feedback about their part of the journey and what heroin assisted treatment has done for them.
I want to be total abstinent of everything, and then could probably help other people do it, because I've been through it and I know what the problems are. I don't know exactly how to deal with them, but I know how you can start to sort of deal with them. This might not work for everyone, but it's worked for me and it's worked for the other people that I'm on the programme with. And like I say, we've been given a chance for a lifetime, and you can see the difference in everyone, I think.
I was in a bad place on drugs. I never let anyone know that I was on the drugs. Like, my close family did, but my children didn't. I'd rob Peter to pay Paul, I'd rob anyone. It was horrible. And I'm going to say anyone, I mean like the shops, and just cry every day. Very, very low down. I'd definitely say I was at rock bottom, just doing drugs wherever I could. And then I got put on this course, and it has truly changed my life. I've put in negatives after negatives after negatives through this course.
So I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening. Apologies for the technical glitches there, but I will share that link so you can see the walk through. And thank you very much. I can't say anything more powerful than those two individuals who have benefited massively from heroin assisted treatment. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. Absolutely, we'll circulate that link to everybody, as I said, so everybody will be able to see that video. But thank you, Danny, for a really positive presentation and a positive end to what's been a really positive morning, I have to say. I am conscious of time, everybody. I know we are slightly overrunning, but before we do conclude, there are just a few questions that I want to try and deal with. If you have asked a question and we don't get around to dealing with it, then do forgive me. It's just a matter of time, I'm afraid. So if I can first refer to a question that's been asked by Councillor Dylan Rees. Bore da, Dylan. Welch iawn gweld bod chi wedi ymuno efo ni bore yma. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Councillor Rees is actually a member of our police and crime panel here in North Wales. So Councillor Rees asks, what link, if any, is there between the excess mortality rate of drug-related deaths for prisoners recently released and lack of accommodation and support at the time of their release? If I could direct that one to you first, Sir John.
Yeah, thanks. And I think those are the sort of questions we have to ask ourselves very seriously, because the situation we have in most prisons in the UK, and I don't actually know whether this is applicable to Wales, but it is in most places. This is known when a central level of the planning, when services are about to close for the week. I think
We seem to be having some connection issues, I'm afraid, Sir John.
Sorry, I've lost you. I'm not sure if I'm. Yeah, I was just saying is that there's an excessive reliance on the naloxone itself. And that wider view, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Thank you, Sir John. We'll move on at that point, I'm afraid, because the connection does seem to be dropping in and out quite frequently. So I'm certainly struggling to capture most of what you're saying, I'm afraid. Danny, if I can refer the same question to you and perhaps to George as well, and your experiences, this issue of lack of accommodation and support at the time of their release from custody, is that a significant issue in your view and in your experience? George, if I come to you first.
I think speaking more broadly from my perspective, I couldn't necessarily talk from a Middlesbrough perspective, but I guess what we do know is 1 in every 200 people who have a history of opioid injection who reach liberation will die in the first 4 weeks of coming out of prison. So I think kind of echo Professor Strang's point, that kind of having naloxone in people's kit bags when they come out is an absolute no-brainer. But we also, for me, getting back to that person-centered touch. So lots of the people who we see who come out of prison, there hasn't been a hugely great joined-up approach, actually. So not a great deal of communication which has been happening. And some really sinister views as well from people who use drugs who say they'll release us on a Friday night at 4 o'clock when there's absolutely no service provision in place. So kind of again, you have heightened risk of overdose and death.
Danny, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I'd just echo those points. I think, the level of communication needs to be improved. I think in Teesside, we've worked very hard to ensure that that's the case so that we get timely information about individuals who are looking for release. Middlesbrough's got a lot of available housing, so we do get a number of prison releases that come from outside of the area. I think one of the challenges for us, and one of the things that we rise to, is making sure that we are welcoming, open and available for individuals when they are released. Because I think one of the key issues, as George alluded to, is that if somebody's released on Wednesday but doesn't rock up to treatment till Thursday, in some areas, in some services, that can mean that treatment is missed and not accessed. Whereas a service like myself, ours in Foundations, is that we will ensure that that person is seen. And I think that's critical on behalf of community services, that we recognise the risks that individuals are under at that very vulnerable time, and that we bend our systems to ensure that they fit the individual rather than that the system fits the employees that are working within it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danny. Commissioner, a question for you, if I may. This question comes from Amber. So what political action is needed, if any, perhaps this is simply a clinical matter, to reduce barriers to wider implementation of HAT in the UK? Do the licensing requirements need to be changed, for example, to better facilitate HAT? So PCC, if I can direct that question to you.
Yes. Thanks, Amber. As far as the government is concerned, there's no legal barriers to establishing HAT. It's accepted by the Home Office. Obviously, there's the licensing requirements, and going by what Danny said, it took some time to get the licensing sorted for the HAT in Middlesbrough. So there may be an issue there. As far as Wales is concerned, we've heard from Tracey that there's no political barrier there at all. But I think there is a question of funding. But I think the argument has been made out is cost 12,000 a year to treat people in the community, whereby it costs 50 to 60,000 in prison. So I think there is a cost benefit to having HAT as an alternative to prison. It's just a willingness now, a recognition by our clinicians on the health boards, Public Health Wales and the area planning boards, that as far as harm reduction is concerned, there is a place for HAT, and that we should be really looking at what areas in North Wales would be best suited to having a HAT. And I know Kaleidoscope will have a view on this as well, so we need to get our heads together after this conference.
Absolutely. We have had other questions submitted, but I'm just conscious that we are running over, and I can see that the number of participants are dropping, so people are understandably having to leave the events for other commitments. So at that point then, I am going to draw it to a close, and because before people do leave, I just want to say a few words of thanks to people. So firstly, can I thank sincerely the 4 speakers that we've had this morning for firstly making their time available in their busy schedules, but the standard of speakers that we've heard from has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure everybody in the event this morning will agree that it's been very well spent. So thank you sincerely for your input this morning and for what's been a really worthwhile event. So thank you for that. I suddenly realized halfway through this that I didn't actually introduce myself right at the start of this. So I'm Stephen, as you've heard, and I'm the Chief Exec for the OPCC. Arfon and I have the pleasure of working with a small team of people within the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And I just want to thank a few members of staff within the OPCC who've worked really hard in pulling all this together. So thanks to David Hughes, and in particular to Helen Williams, who've worked really tirelessly in firstly securing the attendance of the fantastic speakers that I've already referred to, but making sure that in the main, this morning has run extremely well. The technology hasn't let us down, and again has led to a really successful event. So thank you to those, and finally, just thank you to everybody who is on the call for firstly attending, but also to the number of you who have submitted questions and played an interactive part in making a really successful event. So thank you for your interaction, thank you for your time, and we wish you well for the future. For colleagues who are on the call from North Wales, as the PCC said, there's been lots of food for thought, lots of ideas this morning. So clearly there's further discussions that we will need between ourselves and our colleagues on the Area Planning Board and the Health Board, and we look forward to doing that in the coming days and coming weeks. So with no further ado, I'll draw the event to a close there, folks. Thank you very much for your time and attendance. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.